Nigeria is in an economic crisis. The second largest economy in Africa is facing its worst hardships in decades. Inflation has reached 30%. The cost of food is rising 35%. More than 40% of the population are living below the poverty line. Its currency has plummeted, meaning imported goods are much more expensive. Millions of Nigerians are unable to buy food, fuel, and basic needs to survive. In a country where half the population is younger than 18, these factors are causing the worst struggles in years. Things were not too bad just a few years ago. So what exactly happened? Let us go back to how this catastrophe started. Nigeria's modern economy began with the discovery of vast oil reserves in the 1950s, turning them into one of its largest exporters. The oil price boom in the 70s meant revenues exploded. However, corruption and unstable governments prevented Nigeria from developing into an oil giant. Over time, the nation neglected its agricultural output as people crammed into large cities and newly privatized services overtook as the leading sector. It currently accounts for 55% of its GDP, though oil still contributes 2/3 of the government's revenue. So whenever oil prices fall, its economy also falls, which was seen in the 2016 recession. Despite consistent economic growth of around 3% in recent years, the lack of diversity in its economy has led the government to rely on imports for basic goods such as food and fuel. Nigeria has long had fuel subsidies to keep fuel affordable for its citizens. However, this has been extremely costly to the government. It is a rare policy due to its inefficiency and expensive nature, but at least the people have had the benefit of cheap fuel. That was until last May, when the newly elected President Tinubu, under pressure from the IMF and World Bank, ended the subsidy program on his first day. This single action has caused the economic fallout we see today. Without any transitional plan, the end of subsidies caused a sudden shock to the system. Inflation, especially in food, has skyrocketed. The second part of Tinubu's growth plan was to depeg its currency, the naira, from the US dollar, making foreign investment more attractive. However, this has backfired immensely. Its value has dropped 70% against the dollar, making it almost worthless when buying foreign goods. This has only exacerbated the inflationary effects by making it more expensive to import the food and fuel that Nigeria relies so heavily upon. The effect on the poorest is why this is such a big deal. Half of all Nigerians are children, meaning childcare costs make up a huge portion of overall family costs. Parents are unable to provide food, electricity, and power for their children. For most Nigerians, 40% of whom live under the poverty line of $2 a day, it is the worst economic hardship in their living memory. When the currency is losing its value more and more every day, it becomes harder and harder to buy the products needed. Until inflation is brought down, every day will only get harder. Thankfully, there are actions being taken to address inflation. Raising interest rates brings down prices by making borrowing more expensive, reducing the money supply. The current rate is 18%, but the Nigerian central bank is expected to raise these rates sharply, which should slowly but surely bring overall inflation down. Despite this, the government should bear responsibility for its lack of long-term planning. The reasoning behind the policies were theoretically sound. The growth rate was barely outpacing population growth. The subsidies were unsustainable, and removing them would free up much-needed funds. But the implementation has been a complete failure. There has been no evidence so far of using these funds for the poor. The lack of cushioning to recover from such a shock just shows Tinubu's incompetence. A phased introduction of subsidy removal would have softened the blow. Instead, he opted for shock therapy. As a result, he has thousands of protesters lining the streets to show their anger. They are asking whether they will see the promised benefits or whether the money will continue to fall into corrupt hands. They are also concerned that their cash could become totally worthless over the next months. A key problem here seems to be a lack of transparency and communication. Distrust between the public and government has never been higher, so future reforms and policies will likely be met with the same skepticism, particularly if they involve citizens bearing the brunt of costs. The future of Nigeria's economy hangs precariously in the balance. The current crisis, fueled by mismanagement, could ignite social unrest. Yet, within this turmoil lies the possibility for a turning point. If the government, whether it remains or is forced out, can learn from this crisis, the seeds of recovery can be planted. Let us not forget that Nigeria is the 6th most populous country on the planet. That is a huge amount of potential human capital. If utilized correctly, Nigeria can really become an economic dark horse. Until then, they must navigate this turbulent near future. Thank you for watching.